Oh, I tell you what, I'm feeling a bit rough. I don't know if you can see it, Steve. I'm feeling a rough. I've actually got a ruff round my neck. Tudor, you see.
Tudor. To do or not to do? Not that sort of Tudor.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
That would be the one.
Whether 'tis a nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to bear arms against the sea of trouble and end them. That's about all I know, by the way.
Well, that's...
How are you, sir?
That's a lot more than I know, and that's probably going to be the best bit of the recording. I'm fine, thank you very much. I'm fine. How are you doing? You got a bit of a cough there. Are you okay?
It's when I laugh. It's just becoming a habit.
It's only when I laugh. They should make a TV series about that.
Yeah, when was that? What was that again?
Only when I laugh. Wasn't that the hospital series with them in the sick bay with... Not in the sick bay. The sick bays are on ships.
You've never left the Navy.
Oh, never left. Yeah, I might have left the Navy, but the Navy never left me. But
no, they didn't.
Yeah, wasn't that one Only When I Laugh? Wasn't that the fellas that were all in the hospital beds and back in the 70s?
Mind Your Language is a school for language, wasn't it?
Yeah, Only When I Laugh. I'm sure it was. And it was the same geezer who did He's a little fishy on the little dishy when the boat comes in.
Sam.
That'll be the one. Yeah.
Who was the brother of the singer of Sweet, Ballroom Blitz. Remember the 70s,
yes,
that glam group? Yeah.
Didn't Sweet do You Better Watch Out, You Better Beware, You Better Not Go Out If You've Got Long Black Hair? Wasn't that the Sweet?
Right, yeah.
Oh dear. The Sweet.
I thought you were singing a Christmas song there, Steve. I'm sure you started off doing that.
I may well have done. You know, my voices are they morph from one to another. I'll start doing as somebody so kindly pointed out to us many months ago, that was the worst Scouse accent they ever heard. It sounded like a Brummie.
Well, it was.
And
it was terrible.
And as I was trying to do the Scouse accent, it sort of went, yeah, you know what I mean, like that, and it sort of sounded to that, and then
it did.
And I'm going, all right, then, laugh. But anyway, what are we talking about? What are we doing here?
Well, I mentioned the run-in with the Ruff, because we're talking your idea to talk about the history of the Navy, and we got up to roughly the end of the Saxon period.
Okay, so
last time.
First question then: when did the sort of House of Normandy start to collapse? Then when do we move from the sort of Norman era into the Henry II type of era?
Well, Normandy was lost in 1204,
right,
and that changed a lot because. Up until that point, if we can imagine that the Channel wasn't seen as a line between two nations, Normandy was across the Channel, and then you got Englander, and therefore it was control of both. But as soon as the French dominions were lost, Britain then became more isolated and had to think about defending itself. But even then, that didn't mean that you're going to get a full navy.
Yep.
Do you want me to carry on?
Well, so this would have been around the sort of time that the Cinque Ports came in, would it?
Yeah, that's right. So the Cinque Ports, which was Hastings, Hythe, Dover, Sandwich and Romney, they started getting their charters round about, if I remember, I can't remember the dates, just after, around about the 12th century.
Yep.
So just going back to the Saxons had this heritage of what was known as the Fyrd, the levies for the army. That was all that mattered. And the ships were the Scripfyrd, and therefore there was no need for a navy. There was no money to make a navy, not like we now conceive is required. And in fact, when William the Conqueror took over, he carried on with that because he was predominantly then involved in pacifying England. That required an army, didn't require a navy. For his reign, happy with what was happening in the back country, in that case Normandy. So the girt, the wall wasn't really required. But I do have a funny story. I think I've told you this. So William was very superstitious, and he knew he was going to go over and invade England, Wessex. And he called his soothsayer over and he said, right, are we ready to go? And it was just coming into the summer season or whatever. And the soothsayer did the little knuckle bone, said, no, don't go now. 4 days of beautiful weather, they would have got across, no problem. But anyway, he called the soothsayer a second time and said, now do we go? All the ships are there, but all the stuff ready. Again, through the knuckle bones, no. The third time, he said, yeah, go. And that's when they came over. And it was quite rough. It was a rough crossing. And when they landed in Britain, he called for his soothsayer to find out that he'd drowned on the way over.
Oh, the irony of it all. Goodness
Anyway,
me.
so Normandy was lost. And then, as you say, we're coming into the fact that the Cinque Ports... Now, you know that area quite well, don't you?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I worked all around that area. So, yes.
I think there's 14 of them.
The Cinque Points, I can't remember how many there were. But I know that they were very instrumental in the Norman, because obviously Britain being an island, if you want to get to Jerusalem in the Crusades, you've got to get your soldiers across the Channel, and so part of the Third Crusade, I think in the 1190s, was all about getting these ships over through the Cinque Ports, getting them onto the coastline, and then being able to track off to Jerusalem to save Jerusalem, etc., etc., or not, as the case may be. So there was a lot of that sort of stuff going on, wasn't there?
Yeah, and for people who are not British listening, because we have a lot of people out in Canada and States, hi guys, Cinque seems an odd term, but it's actually the English pronunciation of cinq, the French five, because there were originally 5 ports. Why cinq? Because the Normans spoke French, and therefore it referred to the 5 important ports that directly faced France.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about those places, I think one of them now is almost landlocked, isn't it? Romney
Marsh. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So that just shows you how much time's gone on.
Yeah, it really does.
Moving forward, historically, 1340, there was like a little skirmish called the Battle of the Sluys, which is over towards the Dutch coast. That's one that we know of. 1381, a major thing happened. For the first time in British maritime history, only goods produced in England could be exported abroad in English bottoms or English ships. So that required them to be armed, because it was quite a piratical age.
Yeah.
So you'd get these huge fleets coming up from the Mediterranean, coming into the Channel, and they were getting fed up because they're always being attacked by someone from either Channel side, French or British. So at this time, also, Portugal and Spain are starting to get out into the oceans, and especially Spain becoming dominant in the sphere of influence that Britain would eventually get into to begin with. Ships started to develop. They got bigger and bigger, and the reason being is because they had to deal with the ocean more, going out deep ocean. And we see they moved from 1, 2 to 3 masts. And officially, in the age of sail, a ship has to have 3 masts. So that's round about the 14th, 15th century.
So the Plantagenet period, which was obviously that late sort of medieval England time, wasn't it? Where you'd got King John had died. You'd got, who took over from King John? Was that his son, Marshal William
Henry? Hang on,
because this was fighting against King Louis of France, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're going into history that I'm not so familiar with. He was succeeded by Henry III.
Okay.
His predecessor was Richard I.
Right.
And again, you come into the age of Eleanor of Aquitaine and all that.
Yeah. So we track all the way through that period, and it's during that late period that you have Edward I come into play in 1294. So Edward I comes in, and he divides the English navy up into 3 geographical areas, or 3 geographical admiralties, and they're all assigned a fleet. So you've got the Admiral of the Northern Fleet, the Admiral of the Western Fleet, and the Admiral of the Southern Fleet. And that was all under Edward I. And each one of those were responsible for their own sort of admiralty jurisdiction. And it allowed Edward the opportunity to mount expeditions across into Brittany, over into Flanders, or even Scotland.
Well, that's why there was a place. That's why the Fleet of the North.
Yeah,
Scotland was its own navy, of course.
Yeah, and of course this then sort of ties in, or the tail end of that period ties in with the 100-Year War with France, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we're starting to see a far more sensible use and an understanding of how ships can be used to not only just move goods in and out of the country, but how to deploy troops. and how to wage war out at sea as well. Because I think one of the first major battles in the open sea was in 1350 off Winchelsea.
Yeah. And it became a lot more serious in the intent of the Navy. That's not to say they didn't have jokes, Steve. 2 jokes of the era. Are you ready?
Go for it.
What is the distance from the surface of the sea to the deepest part thereof? It's only a stone's throw.
Like it.
That would have had them rocking in the gin palaces in the 14th, 15th century.
Mate, I've had to get off the floor.
Exactly. Yeah. I know. Yeah. Me thinks it's glad I'm wearing a girdle, else my sides would have split.
Dustpan and brush close up.
That's right. Well, there's another one. Don't think it ends there, Steve.
Oh, thank goodness.
What beast, and this is legit from the era, what beast is it that have her tail between her eyes?
Go, tell me.
A cat when she licketh her arse. See, over a beer, you would have laughed at that one. You'd be shortly, gravy would be pouring down your mouth now.
Yeah, instead of just a normal dribble.
I'm not saying where, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely.
But jokes aside, we are coming into an era now where we can recognise that seamen had to be specifically trained for what was now developing. They needed to do unique jobs, which you weren't going to do ashore. Yep. So you could get the hot press. When ships needed to be put to sea, people had to pull a rope. But there had to be people who were permanently able to do certain jobs, like the gunner, the bosun, the master, and so on. Although that's just slightly a little bit later, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we come to the Tudor period.
Yes, we do, don't we? Around about, 1480s?
Yeah, Henry VII, Tudor.
Yeah.
Henry VIII especially realised that at this point, the Cinque Ports, who had their levies to produce men for ships, it was no longer adequate to put ships out to sea. They couldn't get enough men. So they decided to introduce things that we could recognise would be around for 300 odd years after that. There was the clerk, or the clerk of the ships, the surveyor of the ships. Under Henry VIII, there was the Navy Office, and they would do the admin work of victuals, getting the ordnance, and the gunnery. And there's some beautiful names.
Yeah, there are.
Types of cannon.
Yeah.
You must have a list there.
No, I haven't got this. There's some beautiful names, full stop, of ships and things like that. Because obviously with Henry VIII, when he came in, he really started to increase the size of the shipping, didn't he? Increase the number, the volume of the ships there. So this is where you ended up with the Mary Rose. Mary Rose became one of his ships. What was it, 600 tons or something? And then you had Henri Grace à Dieu, Henry Grace of God, or Great Harry, as she was known.
The Grey Harry was made by Henry VII, and he was potentially renamed the Regent.
Okay.
At the time of Henry VII, we don't know whether it's the same ship or not.
What about the Peter Pomegranate?
They had great names like Fair Play.
Peter Pomegranate, I love that. I'd love to have served on HMS Peter Pomegranate.
It wouldn't fit on your cat ribbon.
No, that would be as bad as Commander in Chief, wouldn't it? HMS Peter Pomegranate. That would be me. That would be my ship. Thank you so very much. But anyway,
the interesting thing about the Great Harry, it was the first ship that was not converted from a merchantman. It was specifically built for war. And the Henri Grace à Dieu, or de Dieu, depends which source you're reading, that had portholes. I think it was the first one.
I was reading my diaries, Mark.
Oh, you go that far back, dear?
I go back to when the ships were made of wood and the men were made of steel.
Yes.
But anyway, yes, there's a very...
But I was talking about the ordnance.
You were.
If you don't mind.
No, I don't mind.
Yeah. Cannon, demi-cannon, cannon Petro, the culverin, the demi-culverin, saker, minion, falcon, falconet, and rabinet in size going down.
Nice.
And therein lies the problem. There were far too many different types. There were not, at this point, what's the word when you make them all the same? Standardized?
Yeah.
So it was literally a hit and miss affair, and it was all over the place. And it was potentially, and we'll get to this with Drake and later, another episode, they're almost pirates at sea.
We've always been pirates. Pirates turned peacekeepers, mate. That's what we are. Pirates turned peacekeepers.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a document called the Antony Roll. Did you come across that?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and but
I can't remember reading it.
So that was written in around about 1540, and that gave pretty much a complete account of what the English Navy was at the time of the Tudors. And that it had around about 50 different ships, carracks, galleys, galleasses, and pinnaces. So.
Brilliant, absolutely.
They're great.
And a lot of them are Italian or French. Yeah. They dominated the shipbuilding industry at that time. It was mainly Mediterranean, of course, and they weren't suited to the waters around Britain. They had to be developed over time.
I love the fact that, obviously, the rich history of the Royal Navy, being the senior service and all of that sort of stuff. But right back in the day, 1546, you got the Admiralty and Marine Affairs Office, and we still have the Admiralty building. You have Admiralty Arch. You have all of this beautiful history going back and sort of anchoring you to the past.
Absolutely, the history of the Navy is why the English language develops so much with naval terms, which we almost overlook now. It's just not recognised. We talked about that, didn't we, with Jack Speak?
I was listening to Peter Hitchens being interviewed earlier on today from a podcast, and his
dad was a petty officer.
He was saying that the Royal Navy is his favourite subject. He just loves the Royal Navy, and I'm thinking, good on you, mate. Well done. Yeah. So, there's a lot going on, wasn't there?
It's amazing, though, because we're going to do the Armada the next episode, aren't we? But
we
by
will.
1578, 10 years before the event, the Elizabethan fleet was only 24 ships, 6,500 men. That was it. So we're talking a very small, concentrated organisation that from that point, 250 years became the world's largest organisation.
Yeah.
Amazing the development that will take place from there on.
I mean, Queen Elizabeth was the last Tudor, wasn't she? Last Tudor monarch?
Yeah, it was James I after her. Scott. Tobacco-hating, witch-hunting James I.
Oh, so Queen Elizabeth wasn't the last Tudor monarch?
No, because it was Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, Elizabeth, and she had no heir, didn't she?
Yes, she had no heir. So it wasn't.
She had no heir. She had lots of. She had wigs.
Yeah. Okay. I thought she was the last Tudor monarch. But there you go.
No, that's what I said. She was the last Tudor monarch.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said James I was.
No. He came over. He was the Stuart.
He was a Stuart.
He was the Stuart line that took over. 1601 was it, or 600? No, 603. I can't remember.
I don't know. But I know that she was involved with the Royal Navy, obviously with the war with Spain in 1588 and all the rest of it.
I may have the stomach of a woman, but I have other things.
Something like that.
That's right, yeah.
But this was at the time as well, wasn't it, when you had the divide between sort of the Protestantism and Catholicism as well. So that was also another incredibly important aspect of the Royal Navy, with the battle, if you like, against Catholicism.
And would actually... It's a good point, because that is why one of the reasons a lot of events in the British history happened as they did. So the Stuarts, when James II under Pepys came to power, he wanted to bring Catholicism back into high places, and it's one of the reasons why William of Orange came over.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because he had a real fear that England, coming Catholic, would side with Catholic France, and that he couldn't wait. He had to basically land, and he was called in by some of the high officers who had been brought up to believe you shouldn't go down the Catholic route, and that was the whole point of breaking away from the Pope, because obviously Henry wanted to get divorced and he couldn't.
Yeah, that's right. And with Elizabeth, because she handed over all of that rich history that had led up to her, and all of the infrastructure that had been put in place, all of the developments that had been put in place, everything that had gone on to make the potential for growing the Royal Navy even stronger. So was it Richard Blake who came in and started to do a lot of work around the Navy then?
Yes. Well, it was Hawkins, of course.
Yeah. I'm sure Blake really played a part somewhere along the line. Robert Blake. Yeah, Robert Blake, 1599, 1657, helped revolutionise the Royal Navy and give it power, real power to rule the waves.
What's interesting with the Tudor period that we're going to get into, And this is something that big organisations should consider more, or countries. Something happened in Tudor England that brought to fore some of the biggest names we've ever had in the Navy. So there was Hawkins. You go to Raleigh, there's a Hawkins block, isn't there? Drake.
Well, there's certainly Drake, HMS Drake. There was a Blake block in Mercury.
There was Howard, I think Howard of Effington. That's a great name, isn't it?
It's brilliant. Brilliant.
Edward Howard, sorry. Fitzroy, and then Russell, Seymour. All these, Dudley, all these became great because they were permitted. They was given some kind of largesse and ability to go off and do stuff, maybe, close to the wind. Hence the Spanish hated El Draco. They called him, the dragon, the Drake, because he was almost piratical. In fact, he was. But they were allowed to do so. It was in the interest of the English monarch to allow these people, they got things called letters of marque, to go off and do stuff they couldn't do otherwise. Because the monarch didn't really have the money, the funds, or the navy to really project power overseas. The sovereignty of the seas was coming, but not quite. And there was this doubt whether they could ever beat the Spanish. And of course, what happened in 1588, they proved that they could.
They could indeed. And they also brought in that that later period of Elizabeth's reign, they also brought in a lot of other stuff for ensuring that the ship was ship shape. They started to really focus on the cleanliness of the ship. They also started to work on the diet that the sailors could eat as well. So they were looking at foods that could be prepared in advance for them. So you'd be looking at all of your beers, your biscuits, your salted beefs and porks, that sort of stuff. All of the stuff that could be dried. And even they tested the elixir of the gods, which was the value of lemons to keep scurvy at bay. It's amazing.
It is amazing, and it's a sad. I mean, this could be a episode on its own right. The way that the Navy then abandoned that, whereas, for instance, they were aware that the French really didn't suffer from scurvy because they were giving their sailors oil, olive oil, and fruits, whereas the British seemed to think, oh, that stuff's been. I'm going to use O'Brien type language now. All that stuff's been exploded. We don't go down that route now. And it was similar with the making of ships. We had such a powerful navy in the Age of Sail, but the ships themselves weren't great compared to Spanish and French built ships. They're much more cleaner lined, better wood, and much more, we tend to get the wood that would rot quickly. In fact, Pepys talks about this. He realises that they weren't curing the trees or cutting them down at the best time of the year so they wouldn't rot internally. They were just being put onto the ships and they were rotting in harbours far too frequently. And it was almost like the British said, no, we don't care about that. We'll just go and knock the bells out of the enemy and capture their ships and then we'll use them.
Well, it is a cunning plan, my Lord Blackadder.
It
is so cunning you could pin a tail on it and call it a fox. It is that cunning.
Turnip?
Yeah, I don't know that they had turnips on board. But they did have other exotic items when they were available.
Miriam Margolis would have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So there you go.
It's fascinating the history of the Royal Navy as it tracks all the way back and as it feeds into so many other facets of the British Isles and the development of the nation and as the nation has grown up over these hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, it's brilliant. It's really, really interesting to look back on and to see just how it has carved those pathways out for so many different things.
And the British, it didn't take them long, the English then the British, to realise that their route to the empire as it became was via the sea. You could project by 2 or 3 big ships your authority all parts of the globe if you wished. And we've forgotten that in recent years. It's like almost we've given up our presence. I mean, I remember in the Navy, we were flying the flag.
Yes.
But you can't do that if you've got no ships.
No, you really can't.
So I don't know why we've taken that turn, to be honest, because we've always been an island nation.
Yeah, I know that air power came in, didn't it? And air power was going to be the thing that would protect you. But I think as a maritime nation, as an island nation, you need to understand all of that green and crinkly stuff around you, and you need to be able to operate on it. It's the same where we live now, right? In New Zealand. New Zealand should have a really good standing navy. It's got nothing.
No.
It really hasn't. But there we go. There we go. We can swing that lantern, we can pull up a bollard or two, and we can reminisce about years gone by, Mark.
And we do. And but unfortunately, this is a topic I have to curb my talking, because I can talk a lot about it, so I apologise.
No, you're all good.
So are we going to do 1588 next then?
We should really touch into the Armada, because it was quite a special day, wasn't it?
It was.
It was
indeed.
Do
you remember, full enough, the...
I remember the Armada. I'm not that old, Mark.
Yeah. It would have been 1988, and there were the celebrations, weren't they?
There were.
And there were all these bonfires put along the south coast.
Yes, there were.
Of course, I wasn't in the Navy then, you were.
I was, but I was deployed down the Gulf during that period.
Right.
So I was overseas on deployment in '88. Yeah, so I missed out on all the good stuff, mate.
I'm just saying, did they do that deliberately?
I reckon they did it deliberately. They sent me somewhere where it was hotter than a jam doggy's starboard doggy pocket.
What? You doing Jack speak again?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I slipped back.
Yeah. Yes,
very good.
Did.
Very good.
All right, boy. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, and next time we'll round up the Spanish.
Yeah, and hopefully I won't be feeling so rough.
I hope not as well. You get that stupid collar off your neck now. No one can see you anyway.
But if I take off the ruff, you'd see the bolt.
Yes, indeed. And like I said to you, the tights are not that flattering, and you should not have dressed up as Henry VIII. No one can see you.
You think it's a codpiece, mate, but it ain't.
Dream on.
Take care, bye.
Take care, mate. Look after yourself. Later, bye.